that my pen? I'm sorry about that.
How about the
Rocking and rolling tonight. I hear we're on for an hour tonight. 8:30? Someone pull the fire alarm just to make sure.
Budget flashback, so no worries.
It's on.
What happened to the individual ones? Last time I was
I wasn't on the last
I was
one.
going to congratulate you for...
My wife
And all of a sudden, he's going to have to take it, and I'm going to have to take it.
What's wrong with all girls?
Okay. It's,
Right, here you go.
see if-
Why don't you take these?
I have enough to country, thank you.
Okay, are we about ready to get rolling here?
Let's roll.
Okay, I'd like to call this meeting of the Reading School Committee to order on August 4th, 2003. We have a relatively brief agenda tonight, but before we get into the matters on the agenda, I'd like to take a minute and formally welcome Elaine Webb to the Reading School Committee. It's great to have you on board.
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be here.
Great. As for any of you that have not followed the process, and most of the people in Reading have, I mean, it's amazing how many people follow what goes on. But last week, at a joint meeting of the Reading School Committee and the Board of Selectmen, Elaine was appointed to fill out the balance of the term for this year until the next election for Sue Kavicki's spot. So welcome aboard. It's going to be up until the end of that term, this is going to be a very busy place. So welcome aboard. Back to routine matters. We do have bills and payroll circulating. And before we go any further, let's just take a second to ask for any citizens' input. This is that time. So if there's anyone that cares to make any comments. Thank you. None being seen, let's move on. No gifts tonight, so let's move right into the report of the school committee chair and the superintendent. Go ahead, Pat.
Good evening. We have three appointments to discuss tonight. Two members to the Reading Cable TV Committee, and we just pass around some information regarding that. This is a committee that was discussed at a meeting, joint meeting, selectmen and school committee 2 weeks ago. So you already have some first-hand information regarding that. This is document information. The town manager is also here to answer any questions, since this is a committee that was actually, or a process that was approved by town manager, as can be seen in the second sheet.
In way of a little background, for those of you, and I'm sure most of you have followed the issue out there, over the summer, the RCTV board voted to reorganize their board, and therefore, did away with appointed positions by the school committee and the Board of Selectmen. The selectmen have held a couple meetings and discussed this issue, and out of that discussion came a desire to establish this ad hoc subcommittee to review the issue. And as part of that, they're asking to have two members designated by the school committee to work with them to look into what kind of a contract they could put together to use to work with RCTV. Peter, you're here. If you have some comments.
I think you stated very well. The committee's subcommittee is to be made up of 2 members of the Board of Selectmen, 2 members of the school committee, 2 members of the Telecommunications and Technology Advisory Committee, 2 members from RCTV board, and then the town moderator. So it'll be a 9-member committee. We hope the work will be done by the end of October. And the idea is to actually structure a formal agreement between the town, represented by the Board of Selectmen, and RCTV. On hindsight, we probably should have done that when RCTV was created back 4 or 5 years ago, but we didn't. So, we're proposing to do it now, and I think the RCTV board expressed their willingness and interest in having an agreement or contract like that, and certainly seems in the best interest of the town. The policy that you have in front of you outlines some of the areas to look at, and obviously the subcommittee will look at whatever else they want to look at, and hopefully by the end of October come back with an agreement.
Thank you, Peter. I think, why don't we, at this point, look to see if anybody here would be interested in representing the school committee on this committee. Carl?
I will,
Great. John?
I'd be glad to.
I pointed to John because
Unless John,
I raised my hand.
I would be more than happy to withdraw.
that's interesting. Well, you know, in all fairness, John, I mean, the issue I would have is this committee has taken a position on this, and the question I would have is whether you could represent the position of this committee, not your own personal, and you spoke out very articulately and eloquently for a position that was not the position of this board. So, I mean, I'd be less inclined to have you represent us if you don't think you could, if you could think you could carry the banner of the position of this committee, that'd be fine.
I think it's very important that we always talk about diversity of color in this town, but when it comes down to ideas, there's a problem. Now, I do represent a significant portion of the community, yet even though, 43% of the community did not vote for the override, yet I only represent here about 17% of this board. So it's not whether I carry the banner, it's more importantly to ask whether this committee represents the people.
That's fine, John, but my question still is
I can't.
Okay, then the appointments will be John Carpenter and Carl McFadden. Thank you. Next issue.
We also have an appointment to the Recreation Committee. This was Mrs. Kavicki's appointment. Bruce Hodge from the committee opens this up, and it has been posted, and there's another appointment of the committee.
Okay, and why don't you review the audit committee too, and then we'll have a general discussion.
We also, third opening is for the audit committee. There has been a member of the audit committee, Chairman Dahl, has been on the audit committee as a representative of the school committee. There's one additional opening due to an expansion of the members of that committee, and it's one additional opening of the school committee. It can be a member of the school committee, or it can be someone appointed by the school committee that's not a member of the school committee.
Right. So these are two appointments that we don't need to make tonight, but we'll start with the audit committee first. I have been on the audit committee for 4 or 5 years, and recently, as many of us know, at town meeting, through work on the work that started with the ad hoc governance committee, we've increased the audit committee by 1 member. Was it 1 member, Peter? 2 members.
Actually, 2, one of which is a school committee appointee, and then there's a light department appointee.
So, and the thought among the committees at the time was that it probably would be a good idea if it wasn't a member of the school committee, but someone appointed by the school committee. Because of the special nature of the audit committee conducting a general audit of the town and RMLD and the schools, that having too many members of one group overseeing the group that's going to audit them is probably not a great audit process. So I'd rather not have someone here do that, but I wanted to make it public that we'd be looking for someone to appoint from the school committee to represent us on the audit committee. It's an independent body, does not report to the school committee in any way, but makes decisions concerning the town audit. So we'll just leave that as a matter of public. Yes, Rob?
Just a point of clarification that any appointee of the board, I'm assuming the chair will have the authority to do that, and that we don't have to bring this back to the committee.
Yes. I mean, that's the way we've operated.
Sure, thank you.
Unless this board wants to change that
Nope.
at this point.
Nope.
Okay. And that brings up the member of the Recreation Committee. For the last 11 years, Sue Kavicki has represented the school committee on the Recreation Committee. It's, and that's a committee, let me start over. That's a position that doesn't necessarily have to be a member of the school committee either. It can be appointee of the school committee. But it's also a position that works with the Recreation Committee, and a lot of the issues do surround fields that are used by the school, the buildings that are school buildings, and there are issues that arise from time to time that are important to the schools and important to the town government. So it's a critical spot, and it's a fair amount of, not a fair amount of work, but they meet regularly.
They meet at least once a month.
And there are some of those issues are really difficult issues. So instead of just appointing someone tonight, I'd like you to all consider whether you'd like to do that. And then you can inform me at our next meeting, and if there's someone that has a special interest, inform the superintendent or give me a call.
Now, Elaine doesn't have to do it because she filled Sue's duties, right? There's no pressure on her to do this, right?
Right. 'cause
Although she is going to be, using all those fields.
That's true, but I'd like to get an opportunity to get a view of the other special positions that might be required.
Actually, this is the last one, so you're all set.
Well, I'll wait till next Saturday. I'll think about
But
it.
in the end, we will be balancing all this. I mean, there are liaison appointments that we'll make at our Saturday meeting on the 16th, or we'll discuss. And one of the things we should be prepared to do at that meeting is to discuss those positions and kind of sort out the workload. And this is one of those elements of that workload. And then there's liaison to the selectmen, which tends to be a job that takes some time up, and the liaison to the FinCom, and which is why in the last couple of years, my inclination has been to appoint 2 people as liaisons. That way they can communicate on meetings and make sure we have coverage where we need to have coverage. And one person doesn't necessarily have to attend every FinCom meeting or every selectman meeting. So we'll work on that on Sunday, but those are the appointments we're going to make.
Mr. Chair, if any members of the public would like to get their names to you, we're more than happy to collect the names if they want to send them to the central office, and then we can forward them right to you.
Right. Or they can send them at Town Hall where the posting is too.
Right, and we'll see that they get to you.
And see if they get there, yeah. Great. Go ahead, Pat.
Those are the 3 different appointments that, actually 4 positions, but 3 different bodies that we have appointments coming. The next is an update on the high school architectural contract with Design Partnership. Chairman Dahl has entered into contract with the architects, and we've already had meetings with them, and they're going forward with their plans, and we'll be meeting again on Monday in order to look at exactly when they will be coming forward to the school committee with their presentation on the work that they've done thus far. So we'll have more information coming to you at the next couple of meetings regarding the high school project, but we're delighted to be working with Design Partnerships. They're moving forward very quickly on their project. We'll have a timeline prepared for you on the 16th regarding various important times of this project over the next couple of years.
And I can't say enough how thrilled I am that we're actually moving on this project, and how much of a help it has been to have people like Brad Jones and Richard Tassay to work with, who really carried the ball for us and done a great job. I mean, we wouldn't be in the position we're in if it hadn't been for their efforts.
Regarding that issue, Chairman Dahl, if you'd like to direct me as superintendent to, on your behalf, send a letter to our representatives, we're more than happy to do so.
Yes, maybe, I think that'd be appropriate from the committee.
Yes.
You could draft a formal letter thanking them for all their efforts.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
include Carol Donovan on that list.
Yes.
Okay, any other issues, Pat?
Just on a school calendar, if I may.
Go ahead.
We gave you some information regarding the school calendar that came in the packet. Also, recently, so today, we got some information from Town Hall regarding a meeting with FinCom on August 6th, inviting the school committee to attend. Should the school committee wish to attend, we have posted that, so we're all set. And that's really up to you as a committee to decide whether you'd like to attend as a committee or attend as individuals, should there not be a quorum there.
Hold on, Peter, you have a second to kind of address the FinCom issues for Thursday? I mean, I wasn't at the last meeting, so I didn't know why this scheduled the meeting so rapidly.
Well, I think FinCom has been doing some brainstorming, and I know we've had the first one of those sessions along with, I think, John Carpenter, and a couple of members of the board of selectmen, the full FinCom. And they sort of threw out a whole lot of ideas, as you do in brainstorming. We're trying to get them organized in some kind of reasonable package to be able to be discussed. And I think FinCom is hoping that by the time of the financial forum on September 3rd, that they will have at least a report that they can make on some of the kinds of things they've looked at and and organizing who's looking at what. One of the things that they discussed was looking to other organizations to find out what seems to be working in other communities. And we talked about, the Mass Municipal Association, the National City and County Management Association, State Superintendents Association, and so forth, to kind of get at what's going on elsewhere and if some of those ideas would be workable for us. So they're really trying to move that process so that by early September they have something in place to report to the financial forum. They have on their book potentially to meet the following Wednesday, the 13th. Now, whether they'll decide this Wednesday whether they're going to meet on the 13th or not. So that's the purpose of it.
Peter, can I ask you one question, because it came up and I see it here. Went to Vermont for the weekend. I saw everyone up there as volunteer fire departments.
Yeah.
Can you actually have one in a place that has more than 50 people in the town?
Well, are you allowed to have one by law? Yes. Is it practical in suburban Massachusetts, in a community like Reading, to have one? I think probably not. But again, keeping in mind the idea of brainstorming, the idea is just to throw out all ideas. I think when Pete's got in there, perhaps, maybe I shouldn't give those now.
You said all of them were
All
on the table.
ideas. And that's what brainstorming is to look at all kinds of ideas. And, my own view is that's probably not practical.
Right. No, I was just curious if there was some type of law that
No,
you
it
can't do that.
is legal, and some communities around North Reading has a combined paid department plus some it's called a call department, call firefighters. They actually spend about twice what we do on the time, because when the call firefighters are called back, they are paid. So
Right.
that has turned out to be a very expensive process. But there are.
Okay, one other thing on the calendar, just to let the rest of the board know. Pat and myself met with the town manager and the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, and there are some issues that concern both boards that we're trying to schedule a meeting for. Mr. Hines had requested an early meeting, but was looking at a meeting right in the middle of the first week of school. And with the new superintendent opening 7 buildings, that just would not be a good time to meet. But I suggested sometime in the middle of September. So somewhere between the 8th and the 22nd, we may try to schedule that kind of a meeting. But we'd provide you with the agenda later on. But they are all general issues that do concern how both boards work and some of the issues between them. So that's about all I can say right now, but we'll give you more information as we find a time for that. Okay. Let's move on. There's no old business on the table, so let's move on to new business. Close out of the fiscal year 03 budget.
Each year around, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Oh, please, Pat, go ahead.
Each year, at this time, is the closeout of the previous year's fiscal year budget. Mr. Foley, the town accountant, is here to discuss the sheet regarding the last funds that we have. We are turning over $11,016 to the town. Mr. Foley is here to answer any questions that the committee may have regarding that.
I apologize, Bill. This was finalized today, so you couldn't have it in your packet.
The boiler at Killam is this year, last year.
Why don't I go through this
Yeah.
quickly? It'll be easier, and then you'll see what I'm discussing. This is broken down into 3 pieces. The top section where it starts, administration, goes down to special needs. That's the school budget. And what I've done is broken out building maintenance, the town buildings, and then the Northeast region, the 3rd section. The first column is the balance remaining as of June 30. And that equals about $1,480,000. However, $1,181,000 is earmarked for the teacher's summer salaries. For example, the teacher has the option either to take a lump sum at the end of the school year or be paid over the summer. In this case, this is reserved to pay those teachers over the summer for earnings last school year. So that's why that's reserved. The 3rd column, other salaries, there are none, so that would be 0. The fourth column is encumbrances. And the bulk of the encumbrances here is, under building maintenance, is $136,000. The $100,000 of that 136 is dedicated to the boiler, the kiln, and removing the tank, the oil tank. The remainder is dedicated to removing piping at Birch Meadow, Coolidge, and the high school. The other main piece of the $291,000 there is $132,000 in regular day. And that's basically per pupil money within each school. And one of the reasons that that is so big, and it is every year, is that because of the 30% hold and the timing of the release of those funds, I think this year was June 15th, that each school was able to spend the remaining funds that were released. Obviously, they have a lot of purchase orders out there, but no bills in hand by June 30th. So that's the bulk of what's being encumbered.
I'm sorry, could I interject on that particular line item? I'm just a little bit confused that we have the 30% holdback, but shouldn't that be reconciled on exactly what they can spend and those purchase orders align with their budgets?
Well, in general, it's supplies and equipment, paper, materials, all the per pupil money that they couldn't spend during the year because there was a reserve or hold on it, contingent upon there being enough funds available in the budget as a whole. Now, it was identified that there was enough funds in the budget as a whole, so on June 15th or somewhere around there, those monies were released back to the principals for them to spend.
But we were $132,000 over budget for that total amount, or no? Okay.
At the beginning of the year, for example, say that, these round numbers, at the beginning of the year, Barrows has $80,000 to spend. Right after the budget's adopted and you start that fiscal year, the former superintendent had a policy of reserving. So literally we would take 30% of the money away from each school and put it in a holding account. In fact, that account got up to 40% reserved this year, up to 2003. By the time we get towards the end of the year, you can identify that those funds could go back to the schools. That's what would happen.
Sure.
So therefore, around June 15th, those funds were released back to each school. Now, between June 15th and the end of the school year, you can get purchase orders out. And in some cases you can get bills, but in a lot of cases you're not going to get the invoices. So that's the bulk of the reserve.
Go ahead, John.
So if I understand, the building principals had a stack of purchase orders. They got the release on 15 June.
Mm-hmm.
They knew what dollar amount each of them had. They racked and stacked their purchase orders and issued the ones that were within their budgets. And for the 7 schools, $132,716 of that was ordered, but the invoices have not been received, right? Now, by doing it this way, it's still on the FY03 budget, not the FY04 budget. It doesn't hit their new budget. Just making sure.
That's why it's here.
That's why it's
That's why
encumbered.
it's listed
Okay.
on the sheet in the fourth column.
So this is part of what we'll see in town meeting, what's that, subsequent, when we get an article that says payment of previous year's bills? No?
If we have that come up, that's a bill without an appropriation.
Uh-huh.
These have appropriations.
Okay.
So they just encumber the funds, in order to pay the invoices in the subsequent year.
Okay.
But it's all billed into, it's all accounted for in the correct fiscal year.
I get
Built into the 2000.
Can I ask one question?
Go
So
ahead.
but the material that's ordered then is really for use in the next school year?
Correct.
Okay.
On the issue of having the end of the holdback, 30% holdback, it's released at the end of the school year. So it really ends up being money that's spent in late May or June for the students of the next year. So
Right.
it's really that's a cycle that the system
Okay.
has been in for a while, which is fine, because it still gets spent in the classroom.
Right,
This is
there's
a lot of program
workbooks or different
Yeah,
curriculum
materials
materials.
maybe.
Yeah,
Right.
you're replenishing supplies
Right.
and all the expendables that are used. Now, and this kind of starts from the whole 30% holdback that was instituted by the prior superintendent.
Which
Because
started off as a 20%.
Right.
At 40.
But what kind of naturally happens if you tell people not to spend because you're not sure how your budget's going to fall? You put off the spending, and you end up in a cycle where by the end of the year, you end up replenishing the supplies that you've used instead of ordering on a regular basis. So what happens in a year like this, or when things are tight, you might have a reprieve next year that you have an opportunity to have all your supplies, even in a tight budget, but you only get 1 year of that. So, I mean, it's just something we just have to be careful of and not assume every year we'll be able to go using extra money for, or using the end of the year money for supplies for the subsequent year.
Rich, you said there's $100,000 appropriated for Killam. Do we have the bids yet? Do we know
We'll
what's...
be doing that tonight. We have the bids, and people will be voting on that tonight.
Oh, I'm sorry.
it.
I'm sorry, I was... and then the other question is, the administration, $46,000, that seems like a lot of money. $46,000.
Could be overdrawn.
Yeah.
Pete, may I add something?
Go ahead.
One of the things that makes this year very different is that in addition to the 40% that we were keeping on hold, Harry also put in a freeze, which meant that in addition to the 40%, there were other monies that couldn't be spent, because everyone had to go to Harry to ask him if, in fact, we could spend X amount of money on whatever. We literally sat around this table and talked about purchases in the order of $100 or $200 on a weekly basis, because we were unclear, A, what this year was going to hold, what past fiscal year was going to hold in terms of expenses. And in addition to that, given the budget that we were discussing for the following year, we didn't know if we were going to be in a position where we wanted to save as much money and try to, offset, as Pete says, for 1 year anyway, some of the results of the impact of a significantly reduced budget, which we were looking at before the override. So we basically put everything on hold.
This was, oh, go ahead, Carl.
One last thing.
I just wanted an answer to my question.
One last thing is that in addition to that, in the past, we used to release part of the money, I think it was half of the money, on May 1st, and the rest of the money on June 1st. This year, we held everything off until June 15th.
That's, okay. Now the $46,000 question.
It gets to the balances after salaries and encumbrances. The negatives means that that budget, that section of the budget as a whole, was either over or under what was anticipated. Why was administration over?
I just assume administration is so fixed. There isn't a lot of variables in there.
Well, one thing we don't do, which we may want to do in the future, is we construct a budget in November of 1 year. It's the budget that's in place for the following fiscal year. And somewhere in the middle of the year, we negotiate all the contracts in general. And things change, people leave, people come. In some cases, certain things will move from one building to another. And we don't really make a readjustment of those salary accounts at that point. So I think that's part of it. Is salaries move up higher than we budget, or they're lower than we budget. And that's where you see the variances. But the budget is constructed.
8 months before. Okay, thank you.
So to get to the, where it says proposed adjustment, what I've done here is taken away all the minuses. there are minuses. And the biggest minus, and it has been year after year, is in special needs. So this is to us. So in a sense, you need to move $287,000 into the special needs budget. And taking it, in this case, from regular day, which has the funds available. Is that clear?
Yeah, I don't think it could be more clear,
Okay.
Richard. You know, we're overspending special ed and forcing ourselves to underspend regular day. Which is, go ahead.
No, good. Okay.
So there's the proposed adjustments, which leaves a variance of $11,016 to be returned to the town.
Okay. Well, I shouldn't say that. Maybe I should go through the other two pieces. Building maintenance, town buildings, there's an encumbrance, there was a balance of about 18,000. Encumbrances, about 4,000 to two building issues. And that would leave 14,243 to return to the general treasury. The Northeast Regional, there's no budget remaining at the end of the fiscal year simply because we budgeted exactly what we would owe the regional school. So that's the three pieces.
So total 25,000, roughly. It's going back.
Okay, so at this point, we will need a motion to return, to close out the year.
Just before we do that, there's no need for some small reserve with $133,000 worth of supplies and materials ordered. Sometimes there are pluses and minuses in the shipping and stuff like that.
Right.
We don't need a few dollars of the
Well,
11K?
In some cases, they take that into consideration when they do it. In others, in this case, it can only go to zero.
Mhm.
If they do something beyond that, it would have to be shifted to the 2004 budget.
So that's how you'd handle it. You take it
One
over
of the
next
unique
year.
things about school purchases and school, you can order things prior to the end of the fiscal year, even for the following fiscal year. So you're allowed to do that, which could mean that you could charge those items to the 2004 budget if needed.
Okay.
Peter, Peter, in reference to the town side, I'm not doing a comparison or anything like that, but in terms of, people always look at our lack of free cash. Is the town, I don't think it's substantial, but on the town side, were you guys under budget too, or is this going to be a wash, so the overall financial picture of the town is neutral? Or, I know 25 grand isn't really that much.
Well, we wound up in the black in everything after our various internal transfers, and I don't know, Richard, if you, I've seen the sheets and I just don't remember.
Well, it's
Probably on a $12 million budget, it's probably an equivalent amount of money, probably a little
Right,
bit more than that.
just so the people in the town know that we ran the town as well as school in a positive aspect. 'Cause they're-
positive on the expense side. I'm not so sure where we are on the revenue side.
Okay,
But I'll know by the end of it.
okay.
One of the things I think we should comment on, though, is we're getting to the issue next of the boilers, is that as it was noticed that we had extra funds available through building maintenance, and by moving other accounts that had been under budgeted, it was then decided that a good place to put that money would be in building maintenance, and the need to replace the boilers at Killen was pretty evident. So that's why we're going to be doing that too, as part of last year's budget. So at this time, I'd entertain a motion to accept the changes as outlined in this, in the changes as outlined by Richard Foley, and close out the fiscal '03 with a positive balance of $11,016.
Move the school committee approve the line items as stated in the superintendent's memo July 31st and Richard Foley's accounting as of June 30th, 2003, with the positive variance of $11,016 to be returned to the town's
General fund?
general treasury fund.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? None being seen. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed? That would be 6-0. Okay, next issue. Approval of the town meeting warrant articles.
Thank you, Richard.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Richard. It's always nice to finish in the book. Much better.
This year, that was not a foregone conclusion.
Yes, I think it has to be a foregone conclusion.
Just didn't look like we were going to get there, did it?
Well, it's,
But I think the school committee and the former superintendent took it very seriously. That's why I have to say.
Yes.
Because of the state budget cuts and the town side. All the town departments need to be commended really for
oh, yeah.
That was probably
doing such a good job of managing in tight times.
Good, astute managing, but without the careful financial stewardship and financial management of you and Mr. Foley, I don't think we could have done it. We owe tremendous debt to your attention to detail and foresightedness, and I, for one, thank you very much for your work.
Well, you're welcome. Sure, I think probably the larger portion of that would go to Richard. I think you could call him Richard instead of Mr. Foley, but thanks, John, I appreciate that.
Okay, let's move on with this. The articles for town meeting. I'm just seeing these, so if you give me a couple minutes to review them, or would you like to give us a little background?
Well, I'll be glad to give the background. We have received a notice from Peter Hechenbleikner, the town manager, that he would like to have any subject matter for any articles that any departments were planning by August 22nd. So I had mentioned that to Pat when we were having some meetings. And one of the things that we brought to Pat's attention and would like to bring to your attention is that we had $450,000 that was appropriated for schematic drawings of the high school, and that was done in November 13th of 2001, and then it was also amended in April 2002, and it was approved by the voters in question 1 on April 2nd of 2002. So it went through a long process, but the long and short of it was that we didn't spend it all. But in last January, when we were borrowing, the indication was that we were going to spend it all. We borrowed $400,000, and then in January 2003, we thought we'd need the extra $50,000. So it turned out that we didn't, and the school building committee, which was the group that was authorized to spend these funds, has now disbanded. So we have borrowed $23,565, for which we have no place to spend it, nor a body that is authorized to spend it. Now that's a problem, because once you've borrowed the money, you need to have a home for it, and otherwise, we'll be earning money on it, it'll be arbitrage, and the federal government won't look kindly upon that. So what we need to do is go back to town meeting, and it is under law, under state law, it allows us to transfer those funds to another like project of the same number of years. In other words, there are various numbers of years that you can borrow for various things, so, or higher. In other words, if you can only borrow for 5 years, well then you could go to another project of 5 years or higher or whatever. So in this case, where it was a debt exclusion vote, it seems, and it was for the high school appropriated money, it seems that it would make the most sense to transfer it to the high school project. So that would be the subject matter of this. Now, normally the way it works is that the departments would submit the subject matter of the article, and if the school committee felt that that was the subject matter that they wanted to submit, then we could have bond counsel or town council or our finance department, we could look at it a little more closely and maybe word it a little bit closer. But what I did was look up all the references to the various articles so you'd know exactly what we were talking about. And so that's the subject matter of that first item. It would be, we could almost tell town meeting it was housekeeping in a way, although it is adding to $23,000 to a project. And, but it just seems like a reasonable thing to do, so that's what we thought we'd bring to the school committee at this time. Then the other item is that for a number of years now, I've heard, former superintendent and some members of the school committee or the school building committee wondering whether we could think of the new elementary school in Barrows as more as one project than, two such separate projects. And we did vote them as separate projects, and, by looking at all the, various articles and the votes by the voters and so forth, they certainly are separate projects. However, it turns out that Barrows is on a much tighter range, shall we say, than the new elementary school from a financial point of view. Now, we haven't bid out the Barrows project yet, but I understand that we're thinking of bidding it out in October and get the bids in December. And so it would seem that it would be a good thing to alert town meeting that we might want to transfer some money from the new elementary school project to the Barrows project. Now, you don't have to decide now how much money, or even if you absolutely will do it, but if you don't have an article in for the town meeting in November, then you absolutely can't do it. And so this would give you the opportunity to study the situation, see whether you wanted to provide some flexibility, whether you did want to transfer some money. Now, probably, technically, what we would have to do, in concept it's transferring the money, but technically we probably have to rescind some of the new elementary school appropriation and increase the Barrows appropriation. And I probably would do it the other way around, increase the Barrows appropriation first and then rescind the money from the new elementary school. But, that would be the concept of the second of these two article ideas for the fall town meeting.
Mr. Chair, tonight's meeting is not for any action of the school committee, simply to give us a direction in which to proceed in order for the finance department and town council and bond council to review these warrant articles. And then we will then come back to you, should you wish for us to go in this direction, come back to you with the final version that the committee will vote on.
Thanks. Comments? Well, let me start off because I've got a few issues. First issue, though, on a more procedural level, is who would be presenting these articles to town meeting? Would they be from the town treasurer or from the school committee?
I would think it would be the school committee.
Okay.
If you wanted the town treasurer to address them or
Right.
answer questions, she would be glad to.
I have no issue with the first one. In fact, I think the first one is appropriate. I mean, the $23,000 is money appropriate for the design. And while you might say, let's just turn it back, it is a large project, and we expect to manage it as efficiently as possible. But it is a 3-year project that's just getting underway. And, we can expect it to be tight, and we can expect that $23,000 may be useful for some last measure of outfitting that school properly, or some last bit of design work. So I would support that.
Just one thing, please. You really can't turn it back because it's been borrowed.
Oh.
So we have to apply it to a light project.
Oh, well, okay, that's even better.
So this seems like the most light
Right.
project.
And I think the issue would be that at the end of the project, the idea is to manage the project as efficiently as possible. and hopefully there would be money to turn back after that that is not borrowed at the end of the project, 3 years from now. Would that be correct?
That
Like if we were under budget on the, right.
Then what you do is you rescind the authorization. That was what we did with Parker. If you
Right.
remember, we had appropriated, I think it was 13,900,000, and we ended up only needing to use 13,200,000. So we, in the end, we rescinded 700,000 of the appropriation. And you certainly can do that if you haven't borrowed it. And we haven't borrowed all of the elementary school money yet. We've borrowed 7,900,000 of the 9.1 of the appropriation, and we haven't borrowed any of the 2.5 for the debt exclusion, the later appropriation.
Let's take these one at a time. Are there any other comments about the first article? Okay. Second article, any other comments? Just a minute, Bill. Go ahead. Rob.
The only question I have is it'd be nice to see this over the 2-year period of time of construction where we're borrowing, just so we're in concert with the construction project and with that 2 years going out. I mean, at the Finance Committee meeting, I think it was about a month ago, those folks that are the financial wizards like you mentioned we should go out and borrow tomorrow for these projects just because of the rates. So I'm just hoping if we need to adjust our bidding process or anything else for barrows that we keep in mind the financials that are at stake here. And if it means borrowing earlier than expected, let's rev up the construction and move things along faster to meet that, I guess, that 2-year window that you've mentioned that we need to spend it within.
Okay, well, we can only borrow from year to year on bond anticipation notes. And right now, we, don't have the money to go out for permanent bonding because we don't have the SBA reimbursement as yet. And we don't really know when we'll get that. We did get on the list fairly
Right.
timely because we got on the list back in '98. So we were further along the list than we would be if we just gotten on the list now and say we are for the high school project. But nonetheless, we don't know exactly when we get the money. So we need to be a little bit careful about not, bonding too early because then the town would have to pay this 9.1 million is inside the tax levy. So the town would have to come up with the principal payment as well as the interest payment. And that's the problem.
Okay.
And right now I borrowed $7,900,000 because we were working with the architect to see what the process was, and it certainly looks as if we can spend that because we expect the school to be finished in 2004. So that's sort of that's the other benchmark that even if you only borrow for a year, you have to be able to spend that money in a timely fashion as well. So with the Barrows project, that looks like it's being moved along a bit. But again, we suffer the same thing. We can't really bond and tie those low interest rates in for a long period of time because of the SBA reimbursement.
So that you're expecting 2 to 3 years out then for that?
I really don't know. I mean, there's a moratorium on taking the projects for 2007. I'm not even sure. I haven't seen how much the appropriation was for this year, if anything, for SBA. And that is going to tell us what is going to move us along the list, is how much the appropriations are going to be for SBA.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I think they're in a period where they're trying to look at just what they're going to do about it. It's been termed the second big dig because I believe it's
11 billion.
11 billion, exactly, that they committed.
But we get so much more than a tunnel.
Yet.
We get schools.
Start over again, get rid of the tunnel.
So in any case, we need to look at all that funding, but then the high school is a different story. We have the special legislation, special act in the hopper, and hopefully it will pass. And that would allow us to bond for 30 years, which would mean we could sell debt in this climate. And it's a debt exclusion, so we would be paying, if we did level debt, it'd be like a mortgage, and you'd be paying a level amount every year for 30 years. and that would turn out to be about $422 in our present estimates per average house per year. And we had anticipated when the campaign went out that, you know, the highest amount the person would have to pay would be approximately that. So that, and the reason for doing that is because it looks like now those projects that were added late, like the high school, might be 10 to 15 years before they got SBA. And right now, it was put before the legislature to allow towns to do bound anticipation notes for 10 years instead of 7, but that was killed. I believe that the governor didn't sign that, so it's only 7 years still. So if you borrowed on temporary borrowing for 7 years, then you have to sell your permanent debt after that, and that would mean a huge spike in the debt exclusion program, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
Sure.
We're trying to lock in a low interest rate so that we don't have to keep paying money every time you roll over your bond anticipation notes every year. There are the costs of the sale, and you know, that can be $10,000 to $15,000 right there. And when you do a bond sale, it's probably $40,000 or $50,000 depending on the size of the sale. So you don't want to have to keep doing that because, you know, that comes out of the project.
Sure.
And so, you know, there are a lot of issues that go into this, and I would love to sell all the debt, you know, immediately and lock in these low rates, but there are reasons why we can't.
Okay.
And why we have to phase it in and look at it carefully. And once we hear whether this legislation goes through, then we can figure out what we're going to do about the 30-year. But that's just for the high school, that's not for the elementary.
Sure. Okay.
And with that, there still is a restriction on how much you can borrow at once. You have to be able to spend it within 2 years. Within 2 years.
That's right. And there are benchmarks, like it's 10% in the first 6 months, 45% in the next, you know, at the end of the year, and then 100% in 2 years.
The issue, as I see the second article here, is whether or not, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks as if what we're doing is setting ourselves up to move any overage from the school being built at Sunset Rock to the project at Barrows.
Yes,
Go
sir.
ahead.
No.
I have some fundamental uneasiness with that, partially, well, for 2 reasons. One is I'd like not to think that we already have overruns with Barrows. I'd like to think that it will be managed to the penny. And the second is that we really have issues still with the Sunset Rock School to be thinking about moving money away from the project, since that is actually under construction, and already things like the consultant building inspectors cost us dearly, which is just another example of something that wasn't clearly anticipated, because that's not the way we've done school buildings in the past. In the past, we've used the town the town personnel to do those issues, and in this time, because of the large nature of some of the projects that are on the docket for the town, they've adopted this as a business practice to go out for consultants. Does that kind of sum that up, Peter?
Yes, basically we have a plan review consultant who has worked on the Sunset Rock project and done a review on general structural, fire prevention, and accessibility. I talked with Pat today about getting the rest of the trades done for that. And for Barrows, what we would hope to do is actually have all of that done before you go out to bid, so that you're not hit with change orders if the plan review determines that there's something wrong with the plans that needs to be corrected. But we do need to do that. We just don't have the resources and frankly the expertise to deal with these very complex buildings with our building inspector. And frankly, for all major construction in the town now, including the high school project and obviously the landfill project and some of the other major 40B projects, we'll be sending them out for outside tender.
Not to be argumentative, and not to dwell on this issue because it's really not germane to this, but in the past we have, when we built Coolidge, we used our own personnel in the town to do all that work, which was considerably less expensive than these outside consultants.
Yes, it's free. School department didn't pay for it directly, but the issue, there are 2 issues. One is we had an additional inspector at the time that we don't have right now. And secondly, we didn't have the level of other construction activity going on in the community that we do right now. We've got a major landfill project going on. We're actually just in the process of hiring an additional inspector to help with that project, but that doesn't help with the, with these projects. And, our building inspector, I think, is honest enough to admit that he really does not have the level of expertise that he would like to have on some of the structural kinds of things with these projects now, particularly things like the HVAC systems and, the sick building syndrome and all that sort of thing, that he really feels most comfortable having somebody who does that for a living every single day and is used to dealing with large projects. So I think although it is a little bit of a financial hit to the projects, we're talking about the order of magnitude of $5,000 to $10,000 for the elementary school. Certainly as the building owners and you all being responsible for them in the long run, they should yield dividends well in excess.
Pat?
It's about $5,000 to $10,000 per report. So we're talking about a number of reports by just a guesstimate. This is a true guesstimate because we don't know what a large project like the high school would. We could be spending on all three projects upwards to $100,000 on these special reports, just to let you know ahead of time. And this, which is the reason why we bring this article forward, because we cannot predict where the Barrows bid will come in. The bid will be going out in October. We will not be getting back the bid until sometime in December. The town meeting is in November. So what we would like is just simply to at this point, we just wanted to put together, with the advice of Beth, to put together what we see as flexibility in use of funds, so that we cannot, so that the committee has flexibility to be able to move some money should they see fit between a building that in November will be under considerable construction, so you'll be able to know where that stands. All of the inspections will be done, so we'll know if there are any change orders that need to be done because of the inspections. We'll be able to know that. Also, the architect will have a better handle on what the costs are at that point in that project. So just be able to give the committee flexibility to be able to move money. Should they choose not to move money, they cannot bring this article forward or ask to be permanently tabled at town meeting, so that this doesn't, it does not affect the funds. We just wanted to be able to give you flexibility because though we heard some good news today regarding construction bids that they're coming in lower than what some of the bid estimators are predicting, you never know what may happen in the economy, and we just did not want to happen that all of a sudden that the bids at Barrows come even $10,000, $15,000, $1,000 over bid, and that's all we need, and we wanted to be able to move some money. At the time, we would have to wait until the next town meeting, which would actually slow the process down of the building construction. So that's really why we bring this forward to you at this time.
Richard, can we have the 25,000 back?
And part of my, I don't want to belabor the point, but one of the reasons I wanted to have, when you see things like this, a more extended discussion is because we want all this to be, the people that are watching to know that this is all up front. When things are being transferred, they have a complete explanation on what's being done so that they can have faith that we're trying to do our best to manage these projects effectively. Bill, you had your hand up earlier. Do you have something you wanted to say?
I do have a problem with it because I think...
Does he have to identify himself?
Sure, Bill Brown. Nobody in town doesn't believe that. They've only been here 2 days. I do have a problem with it in that we went out for an exclusion for the added funds for the schools, for the thing, and I don't think this handles that, if I'm reading it correctly. And what you're saying is you're going to use the money from the exclusion to do a school on all which was not on the same ballot question. I have a very serious problem.
It doesn't have anything to do with the exclusion. It would be from an appropriation.
Yeah, but you went for exclusion money, which is above the original bid for the school building. And I do have a serious problem.
Yeah, no, that could be an issue. But in this case, the idea would be to transfer the money from the appropriation.
The original.
Or to, actually
Okay,
receive
Bill,
some of the
if
appropriation.
I could head you off the pass, I see where you're coming from, and I think you have a very valid point.
I have a serious problem.
And it's good that you have a serious problem, but the point of this is to allow us to have the article available for discussion. If we don't approve the preparation of this article, we don't even have it to withdraw from the table. So I think that if this is going to be on there, we will have considerable discussion about it, which I'm sure you'll participate in.
Oh, I certainly will.
But your comments are, and that was why, one of the reasons why I have some issues with this myself. But
And I agree with you completely. All a warrant is simply a list of things that we're alerting town meeting that, we might discuss at town meeting.
Right.
And that's the process from way back, and we used to
That's
tack
right.
the warrant on the tree in the common, I guess, so that people would know what to come and discuss, and that's by law, in order to discuss anything at town meeting, you have to have it on the list ahead of time. So we're just putting it on the list if you decided to do this.
Right. Yeah.
And then, as you say, the discussion, the issues, everything.
this would be a motion to prepare an article, not to endorse it.
Correct, and it's not even at this point. This point is just consensus of the board to go forward to send these articles to the finance department as well as town council and bond council for specific wording to be back to the board for a vote to bring to town meeting. That vote would have to be by the end of September.
It's true.
Go ahead, John.
You just said bond counsel. Could said bond counsel advise us on a way to do legitimately what Mr. Brown is concerned about? That perhaps the way he's reading this is not legitimate, but perhaps there are legitimate ways to accomplish fund transfer among like projects.
I don't think that there's a problem with it being legitimate. I think it's a political issue as to whether we want to do it. Because we can rescind bond issues that haven't been bonded yet.
Yep.
And we can appropriate more money to a project, and we already did that at Barrows once. We added $515,000.
You
So
could I'm
you
sorry.
can't- It's not that you can't do it. It's a question whether whether it seems appropriate to the school committee to do it.
The real issue, I think, would be is if we found ourselves in a position where Barrows was in a minor way over budget, we wouldn't have an appropriate vehicle to even move $10,000 without going back to town meeting. Go ahead, Pat.
There's even a question of whether you would actually be able to accept the bid, because you would not have sufficient money appropriated. So what we want to do is be able to give you one option, should that happen along the way. We hope it does not. We hope we're under budget, never mind over budget by a smidgen. But we did not want to be left at a point in November where we had not where we did not get the school committee to go forward at town meeting with one option of being able to fund anything that may be over in one project.
So what do we need from this board to move forward?
At this point, just some consensus from you. No specific motion action needs to be, just a consensus to move forward to be able to send this for further review. We'll be coming back to you in September.
Right. Okay, we have either two ways of doing it. We can do this by consensus if there's no one here that objects to moving this forward in a manner as the superintendent described. If there's no objections, then Pat, just move forward with this. Beth, you too, if you would please, and move this to the appropriate parties. And thank you very much for your discussion. It's, these are complex issues.
Well, oftentimes you could do something legally or financially, but you might not feel that it was either an appropriate thing to do or...
And Mr. Brown's comments are well, are taken into consideration. Let's move. Thank you very much, Beth. Thank you, Richard.
Mr. Chair, the next item on the agenda is the boilers at Killam School with money that we had at the end of the FY03 budget. We had sufficient funds in order to send a bid out for one of the boilers at the Killam School, which would allow us now to have one newer and one brand-new boiler at the Killam School. One of the issues that came up, at least in my interviews, was when we have a school that has not had a renovation, what do we do? In this case, what we're trying to do is do some of the infrastructure work at the Killam School in order to keep the systems running appropriately. And as we have funds in future years, we would want to do that, to be able to spend money on building maintenance, particularly on those schools, on the school that we've not had a renovation at. So,
Okay.
there were 3 bids that came in. Just for informational purposes, you'll see one is not a typo. Invincis did submit a 0 bid. Since the bids are blind, you do not know what the bid is when they come in. That is a way for companies, since we already have a contract with Invincis, it is a way, it's actually in our favor, that they submit a 0 bid for 0 work. And it does allow the other bids to remain, the other bidders to remain a little more honest, knowing that there is a bid in the process. So it's not a typo, just for informational purposes. The 2 bids are quite different, and we would recommend George T. Wilkinson Company Incorporated to do the work as outlined in this memo dated July 30, 2003, and award that bid to the Killam, for the Killam boiler replacement.
Any comments, Elaine?
It would seem to me with such a huge difference in the prices that somebody left something out, but that's obviously not the case because you've gone over that.
Right. It's typical for people to, particularly they know there are a small number of bids. Sometimes there's one company, Wilkinson has done work in the district before, so they typically want to do some more work again. Others, if there's only a couple of bids in, hope that they still are the lowest bidder and they make a little more of a profit. So when there's a small number of bids, it's not atypical for there to be quite a substantial difference in bids on anything, actually.
Right. Does this include, I see the engineering controls, 3-way valves, electrical work, so does that obviously goes beyond just the heating plant and out into the delivery system, these
No,
controls?
It would just be, it's the boil that's in the boiler room itself. That's to
Okay, so
replace
those are the
actual
controls.
Pipes and work in the classrooms will not.
Okay,
be
so it's
affected.
not controls in the
No,
classrooms?
it's controls within
Okay.
on the boiler itself.
Bob?
Oh, wait, I was
So
going to...
John, go ahead.
If someone provides a bid that's $0, is that considered to be a valid bid if you're required by law to have 3 bids, if I'm correct? If you're required by law to have 3 bids, is that correct by law?
I've not checked that with town council, but I believe that it is a valid bid. It is a bid that we've received.
Even though they bid 0, it's still considered to be a
I
valid
believe
bid?
so, but I would need to double check that with town council to be sure.
Town manager may be able to shed some light on this.
There's no obligation to receive any more than 1 bid. When you're actually bidding a project, you can award on a single bid. I think what you're referring to is if you're quoting a project, if the threshold of the expense is under a certain amount of money, then you have to get 3 quotes. And those have to be 3 quotes, and a 0 quote is not a quote. But this is bidding. If there's only 1 bid, you can accept that 1 bid.
Okay. Second.
Rob?
I'd like to make the motion. Move to authorize the superintendent to enter into a contract with George T. Wilkinson Company Incorporated, the low bidder, to dismantle and remove the existing boiler, as well as furnish and install a new boiler at Killam Elementary School as outlined in the superintendent's memo dated July 30th, 2003.
Second? Second. Discussion. John?
Just wanted to answer Mr. Russo. My experience is more with the federal acquisition system, but most state acquisition rules are mirrored after it. And in that case, even just a no-bid letter is considered a legitimate bid. It demonstrates due diligence that you have opened up to the industry to bid on your project.
Go ahead, John.
I had called Superintendent this afternoon expressing a concern about whether this particular boiler has capability of dual fuel, that is, whether it's oil plus gas. And the reason I asked that question is the fact that we know in the last several months there's been very high gas prices quoted out in the marketplace. And whether that changes or not, we really don't know. So I asked him what would be the additional cost to have that capability, and if we chose not to, if we did it later, would it be much more expensive? So even though we may never go to fuel, suppose we did it later, how much would it cost then versus doing it now?
Good point.
I talked with Mr. Wilkinson, and the cost to do it now would be $1,300. Would not be a lot more, he said, if they had to come back later. Guessed at about $2,000 without holding into any special price at a later date, because we don't know when that would be, in what condition the boiler would be in, and whether the parts would be, available at that point in time. So it's $1,300 should the committee wish to do that. Just a point of information is that we are in the process, in conjunction with the town, to remove the oil tank that is currently there. So that tank will be removed, if it already hasn't been removed.
It may have.
We're close to that.
Come on, Peter.
All the oil that was in that tank was put into the tank here at the high school. The number of oil was brought here, so we are using the oil that was in that tank. But we are removing that. So there will not be a tank at the site, just a point of information. Should you choose to want to do that, we can simply work with the contractor. If there's insufficient monies in terms of how we budgeted in here, the $1,300 can be taken out of this year's budget should the committee wish to do that.
Since it's really not a tremendous saving, I guess I would not say to have that option right now, because it only costs $700 more later to do it. So if we're not going to go in that direction, so why spend, that initial amount of money? Since if it would cost $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, then I think I would have made the decision, at least made a motion or amendment to actually include that work on the initial boiler.
Well, I guess to play devil's advocate is that if we're going to look to do something a year from now, it's going to cost us a heck of a lot more to put an oil tank in there. So if we really want to do this, we probably want to leave the oil tank there.
Well, I was told, is the oil tank leaking, or I know there's some state regulations that you must have double containment. Now, are we under that particular?
Thank you for joining us, Peter. You've been talking about these oil tanks ever since you came to town, was it 15 years ago? 17. 17?
Who's counting?
But who's counting?
Who's counting?
The oil tank is regional to the building. The building's been there over 30 years. In any circumstance, you want that oil tank out of the ground. We don't know whether it's been leaking. We won't know until we actually take the tank out and examine the soil around it. We hope that there is no problem with it. But again, we won't know until we pull it out. If the
It's single-walled, isn't it?
It's a single-wall steel tank, that's right.
There's no way of determining?
Well, it has been pressure tested, and it's been pressure tested fine. I've sat through several Board of Selectmen's meetings in which we're talking to gasoline companies who pressure test equipment, and you have gasoline machines on the wetlands next door. So, I mean, to the best of our knowledge, there is no leak. It has been pressure tested, but it is over 30 years old.
What would it cost to have the double containment on that?
To replace the tank, my guess is you're talking somewhere in the $30,000 area for a 10,000 gallon tank. That's the order of magnitude.
So it's not likely.
It's costing $7,000 to remove it.
Right.
But at least we're buying a boiler that for a known amount of money we can convert. Therefore, the natural gas supplier does not have us over a barrel,
That's exactly
and we can
right.
negotiate.
That's exactly
Literally.
right.
That's smart.
And it isn't the boiler that's different, it's the burner that's different.
Right.
But again, to play devil's advocate, someone may know that we're in tough financial times. We can't afford to put $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 of that boiler in there. Is it something where we could do, is it as simplistic as, hey, gas prices have gone up, oil's come down, we can hit a switch and transfer everything over to oil and play the market that way?
If you had oil tanks and gas lines into any or all the buildings, certainly you can do that. Now, there is a commitment in terms of getting the gas company to bring the gas into that location to utilize gas for a certain period of time, and I don't know what the contract is. So at least a couple of years, I'm sure.
5 years,
5
3.
years. So you are obligated to use gas in that facility for at least 5 years. At that time, we can certainly look at the fuel situation, decide whether it's worth spending that money. If the difference in cost is great, the payback will be relatively short to come back to it.
Well,
Go ahead.
I didn't think we were going to talk about the boiler so much, but just let me add my 2 cents for what it's worth. It was my understanding that this is the backup boiler at Killam, that we have an existing boiler that's working fine. This is the second boiler, so we're already will be turning into that boiler into gas as well?
That's correct.
And okay. And my second part of the question is, again, we're talking gas and oil. We've been talking about this. This has been a long-term plan, even when I was on the board in the mid-'90s, and I think the town manager led the charge on the town side, getting the town buildings tied into gas, and the schools were just following suit. So I think that's been the process. So to keep one building on gas, one building on oil, and have us convert all the others to gas, I think is not a long-term plan. I think it's just short-sighted. So.
Well, the buildings right now, the only town-owned buildings that are on oil are Barrows, Killam, and the high school. The high school, we spent money out here on Birch Meadow Drive putting in a gas line for Coolidge and Birch Meadow and sized it to serve the high school. Barrows, we have arrangements right after Killam is done to go and install the gas at Barrows. The new school will be gas supplied. Yeah, there are trade-offs and costs as one of them. The cost trade-off for a leaking tank, you have to spend an awful lot of money on fuel. We spent $750,000 cleaning up our work site. You know, what the contamination causes were, I mean, there were probably many. It used to be a car barn, but, you know, it's very expensive to do an environmental cleanup. And, I'm very happy to say that town buildings, fairly shortly after I came here, within 5 years, were all converted. We removed gasoline tanks from the ground and so forth.
What is short-sighted? I don't understand. If we're looking at options, having a discussion with people that know it, I wouldn't think that.
Just that we're reacting to the market. We're not looking long-term. What will the long-term be for gas or for oil?
But if you have options, that's not short-sighted.
So will we
And leaving
convert all
options-
of our boilers then that way?
No, but I'm saying if we have an option right now, you want to explore it. I thought that's what we were supposed to do here, is explore all options.
Yeah, my comment was not that we're going to go to oil. I never suggested that. I'm just saying that we should be in a flexible position and to look at options.
Well, let me just stop. We're getting a little bit off of this for a second here, but the issue that I see is that we need to remove the oil tank. We know that.
Problem.
If we were to try to achieve that flexibility, we would have to put in a new oil tank, either above ground or below ground. In either case, I doubt there's room above ground, which would mean you'd have to go and get a double-walled tank and sink it. So that'd be $30,000. If we found ourselves in a position where we needed that flexibility, it looks as if this equipment could be modified for small amounts of money, so that we could take advantage of that flexibility if we needed to in the future. But again, I think the issue has been that we have been strategically trying to move the buildings to gas, because not only have we seen savings in the past, although they can fluctuate, but the maintenance on the equipment that's gas is a lot cheaper than the maintenance of oil burners and oil tanks and all that, so that even if the price is higher for the fuel, maintenance might be cheaper and balance it out. But we won't know that until we're into spending the money and budgeting for certain supplies at a point in time, and they all fluctuate. So we have a motion that to approve this contract.
So you have to wait for John to get back.
Oh, okay.
We could probably still take it.
Speaking of which, is there room if you wanted to put an above-ground oil tank in quickly, I would imagine there's no room over there at Killam to do that.
Well,
I
I think where the underground tank is now is a paved area, and you could probably just put it above ground there.
Could you do that? Could you?
Well, yes, you
Parking
can, but it is a specially designed tank, and you have to protect it from, vehicles running into it and all sorts of things.
It's a bunker.
It's not an inexpensive solution. If you want to see an above-ground gasoline tank go down the Public Works garage, we put all of our underground stuff out for above ground now for contamination concerns. And, it's a big installation,
Great.
but it can be done.
Okay, we have a motion. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by raising your right hand. Opposed? And that's 6-0 approval of that contract. So much for routine matters. Next routine matter, appointing Patrick Schettini as the Reading representative to the North Shore Consortium Board of Directors. Pat, would you give us just a bit of background on this one?
The North Shore Education Consortium provides a lot of services for us regarding special education, and it is historic in this consortium for the superintendent to be on the board of directors. It's true in just about every community that the North Shore Consortium serves. I would be replacing Harry Haratunian on this board representing the school committee, since it's the school committee that actually contracts with North Shore Consortium for services provided for special education students.
Can we ask him why he wants to serve on this board?
You can ask me anything you want. But I'd like a motion if we could have one.
Move to appoint Patrick Schettini as Reading representative to the North Shore Consortium Board of Directors.
Second?
Second.
Okay, discussion? All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. Opposed? And that's 6-0. You are now our representative to the North Shore.
Put it on your resume.
Okay. Building projects, SBA motion.
That's actually just one motion. After talking with Christine Lynch at the Department of Education in the SBA office, we've tried what else would be needed in the Reading Public Schools in order to proceed forward in our high school projects. There's some paperwork that we just need to provide. It's all minor, but it's just pro forma kinds of paperwork. Some certified votes of our overrides and also certified votes of town meeting, which we have prepared and will be sending in. And one other motion that the school committee needs to make and vote on, which is actually to a vote to proceed with construction. Given the issues around SBA funding, it's a vote that the school committee knows that it will be proceeding forward, even though it may not be on the grant cycle at that time. I have reviewed this with town manager and the town finance director. They do not see any problems proceeding forward. They do recommend, as I do, for vote of this motion.
Okay, fine. Why don't we have the motion on the floor so then we can have discussion? Go ahead. Rob, why don't you present that?
Sure. Move to approve the following resolution, which fulfills the requirement of the SBA Administrative Advisory 02-2, that the town of Reading intends to start construction on the renovation addition of Reading Memorial High School prior to receiving the state grant. The town of Reading has been advised by the the Commissioner of Education that the town may not receive the state grant within the time period allowed by the statute for temporary borrowing, and the town of Reading is legally authorized to issue long-term bonds for the renovation addition of Reading Memorial High School prior to the receipt of the state grant.
Second?
Second.
Second. Carl seconds that. Discussion. John, go ahead.
The voters have approved a referendum this past town election. And the particular statements made by those who wanted this particular referendum passed was that we would receive reimbursement of anywhere between 53 to 58%. And that was the particular implied understanding that we as school committee people and others who promoted the particular renovation of high school, which I also did, though in a different format. And at this point in time, this statement does not indicate anything whatsoever about the percentage of reimbursement. And knowing the governor's statements that he's made time and time again, that it's possible, and even though it may be somewhat remote, that we may get no reimbursement. So it could be anywhere. We really don't know.
John, if I don't mean to interrupt, John, but the legislation that was signed off and approved by the governor states very specifically that we would get the reimbursement that was on the books for the SBA as of January of '03. So whatever was in place for those projects, which range from 53 to 58%, is the amount we would be eligible for with this project.
The other part of that, even though still unsure, is the time period for that reimbursement. which could extend well beyond the 7 years, and this has been publicly stated. So my feeling is that I can't vote for something, and I have a particular responsibility to comply, or at least to fulfill the voters' wishes and certainty of what they're getting for their money, or at least what they're getting for their vote. And so at this point in time, with this uncertainty, I can't vote for a resolution that does not have certain statements that the public is expecting to have before money is spent.
Thank you, John. Rob?
Mr. Chairman, just a point of clarity that I'm assuming that we have to take this vote. This is an advisory by the Department of Education to the Commissioner that we have to, I mean, this language that I read is verbatim from their website. So I think an act by not supporting this, we're going against the will of the voters that overwhelmingly supported the renovation of the high school. Further, just to expand a bit on Mr. Russo's comments, is that on town meeting floor, this very issue was discussed, and it was clear they wanted to put some folks wanted to put additional language into the motion before town meeting about the guaranteed funding, and it was rejected by town meeting. That was on the table at town meeting, very public process. So we not only took out language on the guarantee, but we didn't put the % reimbursement in as well. So I don't think we're committing any ill will on the voters on town meeting. Further, that the state has required us to move this project forward. We need to make this motion and move forward. So I will be supporting this wholeheartedly.
Other comments? Okay, let me just make one quick comment. The only issue that is really on the table and has been is whether this project is reimbursable. That was the compact we made with the voters. And thanks to the work of Brad Jones and Rich Say, we've been able to maintain that and to move this project forward. I think that this is a required piece of the package to get the high school packet that's at SBA complete. So we need to do this. No other comments being seen. All those in favor of the motion as made, please signify by raising your right hand. Opposed? That will be 5-1.
Mr. Chair, we'll be sending this in by the end of this week to the Department of Education.
Okay, last on the agenda, and I really apologize, Peter, that this has taken so long. You know, you set an agenda, you think it's going to be quick, and then you have, and rightfully so, and say an issue of the oil tank that goes on for 10, 15, and I'm not criticizing, John brought some excellent issues to the table on that. It's just that, it's not always a quick vote on those things. We had good discussion. Okay.
So 30 seconds, what do you got?
Well, unfortunately...
Let me just first welcome the town manager again to the table. You've got some presentations to make on loss control.
I do.
We just mentioned one thing. Want also to welcome you here. And also to tell you that one thing that Peter was mentioning to me prior to this is there's a savings to the town of approximately $15,000 due to the training that Peter has been doing, such as what the board is getting tonight. So thank you very much for doing that.
Well, thank you, and I apologize for taking this on you in the summertime when you all have other things to do. I do have two fairly brief videotapes to present to you, and basically the documentation of this presentation through the minutes will serve as notice to MIA, the Massachusetts Local Insurance Association, that we have done our training here, and we anticipate that that will result in some loss control credits for next year. This year we've actually received $15,000 in loss control credits already this year. So even with that, we're over budget on our FY 2004 property and casualty insurance, but that's the nature of the beast. There are two programs that I want to go through with you, and I believe the superintendent has given you copies of the handouts that go with it. The first one that you have is on school board liability, and then the second will be conducting public meetings, both of which I'm sure you have a lot of familiarity with. The material that you have was developed for Maya. It is copyrighted by Maya. We have released a copy and a copyright because this is a presentation for Maya insurance. We, by the way, have our property casualty, workers' comp, and health through the Maya program. It is a program that exists solely for the purpose of insuring municipalities in Commonwealth. So, I'm on the board of directors. It's an unpaid position. It's a nonprofit organization. Hopefully, very well managed and run. So, if we could get the tape rolling first on the school board liability is the first tape.
Change seats.
Yeah,
Yeah, and if you want to move to better positions for you.
Where you go with this, will you tell?
No, well, I would address
It's rated
the
G, I hope,
dude.
for the home audience.
When you're a public school official, you probably deal with different issues in a lot of different places. Meetings, talking with parents for and against different issues, dealing with school employees. But this is one place you don't want to be, in a courtroom, being sued, defending your actions as a school official in a liability lawsuit. All too often, school officials are being sued for mistakes that end up in here, in front of a judge, trying to defend their actions and losing big, losing their position and thousands, sometimes millions of dollars. Even if your school department can afford such costs, public officials may be held personally liable or responsible for public acts and for punitive, or in other words, punishing damages. Insurance may not cover punitive damages. These costs can come out of your budget. And if it can be proven that a school official knowingly did something wrong or acted outside of his or her official responsibilities, then that public official could be liable to pay all costs. Costs like compensatory damages, interest, and attorney's fees. Avoiding such costly mistakes, learning how school officials can control these types of liabilities is what we'll be covering today. There is one area in particular that school officials are most often hit with a lawsuit. That area is employment practices. The courts have often ruled that public school officials violate public employees' federal, civil, and/or constitutional rights in hiring, disciplining, preventing harassment, and terminating employees. Now let's start off by talking about the #1 cause of liability cases, employment practices. Why are over 80% of the liability cases concerned with employment practices? Probably because there are so many laws that could be violated. For example, school officials not only have to follow their department's documents and employment policies, but any state laws too, including workers' compensation. After local and state laws, there are federal laws concerning employment practices, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Fair Labor and Standards Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, the Family Medical Leave Act, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission rules, the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. And within these federal employment regulations are what are known as protected classes. People are protected in the workplace against discrimination in hiring, discipline, and discharge because of race, color, religion, sex, including pregnancy-related conditions, national origin, age, physical or mental disabilities, associating with a protected class. Retaliation against employees for whistleblowing, filing complaints, and testifying about unlawful conditions or violations may also be illegal. Now, if it seems like a lot, you're right. But let's take a step back and see how to minimize your liability in employment practices. First, you need to plan ahead to control potential liabilities before they happen. Unlike car accidents and personal injuries, which happen suddenly and uncontrollably, employment liabilities take a while to develop. You generally have time to plan and deal with them before they become a lawsuit. You have to stop, look, and listen. Stop, look, and listen for what I call the D's of employment liability lawsuits. Drastic action, documentation, discrimination, discipline, and discharge. Now, anytime you hear these words, be careful. One of the biggest problems with some public school officials is that once in office, they want to take drastic action in employment matters. They want to quickly discipline or discharge employees. What they're actually doing is quickly setting themselves up for a potential lawsuit. Be careful about quickly taking drastic action in employment practices. Stop, look, and listen first. Stop and evaluate your plans and look at the situation first. Contact and listen to your attorney or solicitor and your human resource advisor before doing something drastic. Before making any decision, everyone should be looking at one of the other D's of controlling employment claims: documentation. The first document you have to check is your school department's policies and procedures and Department of Education statutes. These should specify what authority and responsibilities you as a school official do or don't have. If these documents don't support your actions, then you could be liable in a lawsuit. The next document you need to check is your employee handbook and policy manual. This is your blueprint for avoiding employment claims. Providing employees with handbooks and manuals is an easy way to summarize employment policies and procedures for managers, supervisors, and employees. They also need to conform to state and federal law. That's because this is probably the first thing lawyers and judges are going to look at in a liability case. But there are a few things to keep in mind with these documents. They should clearly state that they do not constitute an employment contract. They should also state that you can modify or make changes to them at any time. Employee handbooks and policy manuals also need to be continually reviewed for accuracy and consistency. You should also document that everyone understands and is following these procedures. Now, even though your organization may have at-will employment standards, you still have to be careful. At-will employment, where workers aren't obligated to keep working and employers can discharge them at any time, doesn't mean you can fire somebody whenever you want. People have done this and have ended up being sued for one of the other D's of employment lawsuits: discrimination. The most common employment liability lawsuits that school officials have to defend themselves against are wrongfully firing someone, ignoring or encouraging workplace sexual harassment or discrimination, discriminating against people with mental or physical disabilities, violating wage and hourly standards, perceived discrimination or reprisals against whistleblowers, discrimination against or denial of civil rights. As you can see, a lot of them involve some form of discrimination. And charges like these result from when you try to discipline or discharge an employee. Again, be careful. Stop, look, and listen when you start hearing the D's of employment lawsuits. By using good documentation, you can control and minimize such lawsuits. First of all, your procedures for dealing with disciplinary and discriminatory actions must be clearly documented in employee handbooks and policy manuals. Now, you need to take any discrimination complaints and disciplinary matters seriously and deal with them quickly. Don't blame them on some disgruntled employee or let them languish on somebody's desk. Meeting with an employee for work-related reasons should be documented. This includes discussion on policy procedures, disciplinary actions, grievances, or discriminatory complaints. And it's just safer to assume that what you're documenting will be reviewed in court. So you need to be careful about how you write your documentation. The writing should be in a neutral style, like a newspaper article. It should document who, what, when, where, why, and how, not someone's opinion. The writing should also be specific. If someone says something discriminatory or harassing, write exactly what they said, not that it was racist or rude. In disciplinary cases, document the behavior or conduct that must change. Be sure to include a timeline for them, such as the word immediately. Now, discrimination can be an issue in the hiring process too. Just asking a job applicant a seemingly innocent question like, can you work Sundays? Are you planning a family? What's your date of birth? Have been considered discriminatory in the courts. Good documentation can help, but it has to be consistent. Be sure all interview questions are standardized and meet legal requirements. Pre-placement medical examinations cannot be required just for those you suspect of a disability, but for every applicant in that job classification. They must also address the essential job functions. To wrap up this discussion on controlling employment practice liability, let's get to the bottom line. Here are some of the things the lawyers who sue you are going to be looking for. Inconsistent discipline, undocumented or poor communication of policies and rules, unequal treatment such as work assignments and benefits, any discriminatory comments, undocumented training such as undocumented safety training, discrimination against or dismissal of employees for whistleblowing, filing workers' comp claims, or reporting incidents of discrimination and harassment. Did you hear all the D's of employment liabilities over and over? As a school official, if you keep them in your mind, they should keep you out of here.
Away from me, she's my role model.
Yes.
Oh, Ricky, is there another?
Yes, there is. Well, past putting that in, you do have handouts that are really pretty self-explanatory, I think, on all this material. We've done training with our Board of Appeals, Conservation Commission, Planning Commission, staff, and obviously some of these kinds of things may apply more on the employment process to some of your staff, but I think as the elected school committee, you need to be aware that these things are being done or need to be done.
So, all set, and we know what questions to ask.
Exactly.
I'll ask. We're not. That's right.
Guess there's a homemaker law covers how much about that. You see that in the advocate?
No.
Listed, listed all the candidates, and of course their professions. And then it's me as
This one
homemaker.
is on conducting public meetings, something that you're all very familiar with.
Sooner or later, most public officials are going to be dealing with controversial issues. Emotions can be running high. Threats and accusations may be made. People yelling profanities, waving posters. The meeting could get out of hand, resulting in a lawsuit. Unfortunately, the person who may end up being liable in such a lawsuit could be the public official responsible for conducting the meeting. And public officials can also be sued for seemingly mundane, non-controversial things, such as not publicizing the time of the meeting. But whether a lawsuit results from errors in details or a near riot, it's the public officials themselves that can control their own liabilities. And control is the key word. Controlling and minimizing public official liability in conducting public meetings starts before the meeting begins. First, you have to do your homework and know the details of local and state requirements for conducting public governmental meetings. This may be spelled out in your incorporating papers or charter or under your state's law. They may include such things as publicity, scheduling, and the requirements for facilities, handicap access, and public record keeping. Some meetings don't have to be conducted in public. They are sometimes called executive sessions. These private meetings are where confidential matters like personnel issues and contracts may be discussed. But, as always, it's safest to assume that discussions you have in any meeting could later be used as testimony in court. Keep in mind that what you say inside and outside of a meeting could cause legal problems. So if you're not clear on the details of what's required for conducting public meetings, check with your entity's attorney, solicitor, or insurance professional. But don't stop there. It's a good idea to let the public know your meeting requirements too. Having written guidelines for the public can help people know what the ground rules are for a meeting, and they help you maintain control of the meeting. These guidelines may include what are called procedural rules. These rules can include items such as when and how long individuals can speak and can address the display of posters and banners. Establishing ground rules can also be done by the use of pre-meeting workshops or conferences. This is especially helpful with controversial issues. By bringing supporters and opponents together ahead of time, they may be able to agree on common ground and questions of fact. This, too, helps to keep a later public meeting under control. Check your public meeting laws, though. These type of meetings may need to be conducted by staff personnel, not public officials. At actual public meetings, there are 3 things to keep in control, starting with yourself. Public officials need to leave their personal emotions, passions, likes, and dislikes at the door. Don't let other angry people get to you. Losing personal control and verbally attacking or insulting someone or denying them their rights during a meeting could result in a lawsuit. The second thing to keep in control is the meeting's agenda. A public meeting's agenda should follow the format spelled out by a governmental entity's charter, incorporating documents or state law. The point is to follow them. Don't conduct a public meeting by making what a judge could later decide to be a capricious or arbitrary decision or action. Open the meeting by clearly stating the subject and rules or procedures that will be followed. This could include the registration of speakers, the order of their testimony, time limits for testimony, and provisions for closing the meeting. Third, keep the public and their emotions under control. Establish what the procedural rules are at the beginning of the meeting. If included, specify that people can be asked to leave the meeting for loud, disruptive language or noise, refusing to comply with the rules of conduct or the orders of the meeting's presiding officer or moderator, the use of posters, signs, banners, or placards that are unauthorized by the presiding officer or moderator. Again, be clear that anyone not following the procedural rules could be asked to leave, that their testimony time could be ended, or that the meeting hall could be cleared. And always have such rules reviewed and updated by your legal counsel. Don't just make them up. On the other hand, public officials conducting meetings should be courteous too. They should thank people for their statements, questions, and participation in the meeting. At the close of the meeting, summarize any follow-up action needed to resolve remaining problems and announce when and how that action will happen. Let's wrap up our discussion of public official liability with some final suggestions and precautions. Throughout the program, we've repeatedly recommended that public officials consult with lawyers, attorneys, or solicitors. Now here's a few precautions to keep in mind when you do. Ask yourself if the person giving legal advice really knows what they're talking about. Do they know local and state laws? Or are they merely telling you what you want to hear? It may also be a good idea to talk to an insurance specialist too. Another precaution is to remember that a governmental lawyer or solicitor's primary client isn't the public official. It's their governmental entity itself. So any discussion that public officials have with their legal counsel could end up as testimony in a court case. When conducting public meetings, keep yourself in control. Losing control of your emotions can lead to losing lawsuits. Use your procedural rules to keep other people attending meetings under control. Finally, like we said at the beginning, liability claims against public officials aren't like claims for car accidents or personal injuries. They don't happen instantly and uncontrollably. In fact, as we've seen, it's just the opposite. Liability claims against public officials actually come about slowly and are easily controlled. And the person who can do it best is the public official.
Call the meeting back to order. Next matter is zoning number 31.
I think it's fairly self-explanatory. If you have any questions or comments, I'd be glad to address them, or anybody here who can.
Any comments? I haven't seen our meetings get that out of control. But it is interesting, and I don't want to go too far into this, but the idea of procedures on how a meeting is conducted. We generally have not, we have a certain agenda that has been by policy set out that we follow, and we're usually pretty good about following. But we never really have had procedures on who can speak and when. And yeah, I'm always torn between wanting to be very specific and the fact that in some way that kind of removes that sense of having neighbors come and speak at times without having to plan and sign up to speak. I mean, my sense is that unless we have a problem, it wouldn't change that dramatically.
I think in a town like Reading, probably all the board committees and commissions share that feeling, that they don't want to formally formalize things, and we haven't really had a need to, in large part now.
Yeah. Although,
I can tell you over the 17 years here, the Board of Selectmen has had a few very large and fairly raucous meetings, but even with those, I think the chairmen have always been able to manage those appropriately, let people have their say, but do it in a civil way.
I would hate to get to the point where we would have someone like Mr. Brown not be able to share an opinion with us tonight on an issue I think that was pretty important. At the same time, if we were to have large meetings, I mean, there might be times, and we've had that at times when we've said that there's going to be no public input at this meeting, or the public input will be conducted in this manner. I mean, when you've had public hearings. But anyway,
That's perfectly appropriate in the open meeting laws.
Thank you, Bill. Again, see, public comment.
See, that's why we got to shut them up.
I think what you need to make sure of, and what came out of me from this video and public meetings, is to make sure that you're consistent. That person A has 5 minutes to speak, and person B should have 5 minutes to speak also.
Right.
And whatever the rules are, that they be consistently applied. And rules of courtesy, I think, really apply. And if somebody does get out of hand, certainly the school committee or board of selectmen or any other body should feel at all threatened. I mean, there's certainly an appropriate way to deal with that, just to adjourn the meeting and ask the people to leave or to be clear to whatever it might be. Again, it's hard to think of that happening in Reading.
Yeah.
Wait for redistricting.
Anyway, any other comments to the town manager? Really,
thank you very much.
Oh, hold on, before you go,
Yeah.
there's public comment here.
Pete, the one area that I think that gets covered in the open meeting laws is the emailing.
Mr. What?
Emailing. You can get yourself into trouble without even knowing it, and I think that has happened. The district attorney strongly suggests that the only thing you use email for is agendas and nothing else. You can do it in serial fashion and not even realize it.
Right.
I don't have email, so I'm safe.
I think you're absolutely correct in one way. The email is an issue that's covered under the open meeting law, but even with email, it's always difficult to know. I mean, if I send something out to one person, you don't always have the control over who it goes to.
That's why they suggest not doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's wise that all of us be very cautious with email because it does, and it is covered, as Mr. Brown just said, as we all know, under the open meeting law.
I think the other way to address that, in addition to all those being careful, is, and I do this as a practice with the Board of Selectmen, we list correspondence. The emails that have gone to the Board of Selectmen or from the Board of Selectmen get listed and copied in the correspondence for their meetings. So there's never any issue of it being, any kind of a backroom issue or secret deal or anything like that. I say that, anything substantive. I mean, are you available to meet on Thursday? No, Wednesday's better for me. Obviously, we don't do that. That's very procedural in nature. But emails that are received, and we try to get people, because we do get a lot of email correspondence, instead of people telephone calling or writing letters, people tend to write emails now. So if an email comes in on, the skateboard park, and it comes in, it's gone to the Board of Selectmen, and it comes into Town Hall, that gets listed and copied on the next Selectmen's agendas, just so that there's no question that there's any sort of ex parte communication, that it's all upfront and addressed on all of these.
Thank you.
But that's an emerging one, sir.
Great. And once again, on behalf of the board, I'd like to thank you. On behalf of the town, because you're saving us money by doing this. So thank you very much for
Thank
coming
you.
tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if there are any other issues, we could always have either town council or labor council come in on any specific issues that you may have.
Yeah. One of the things that I know that Board of Selectmen does do is, at the end of, as they post and print their agenda, they do have the series of communications attached to it. We have not done that. We do disseminate communications, but we might want to think about doing it in a more formal way. Let's give that a little thought. I don't want to belabor the point right now. Last thing on the agenda is minutes. I think that the minutes, we should be able to get through these rather quickly.
On the minutes. Move to approve the minutes dated May
Good night, Bill.
29th, 2003.
Second?
Second.
Discussion?
May 29th?
May
Okay.
29th.
Let me just, again, we do have a new member on the board, and I believe that she is aware of this, but you do not have to feel as if you have to abstain. Some members have done that in the past. You are legally allowed to vote on these and in whatever manner you choose. That being said, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by raising your right hand. 6-0.
Move to approve the minutes dated May 30th, 2003.
Second.
Discussion? Any changes? None being
I
seen, all
do
those...
have a...
Go ahead, John.
In the discussion of narrowing from 3 candidates to 2 candidates, you have Mr. Russo's statement in there. I don't know if it, there was a lot of discussion, and certainly we don't want our minutes to become, the great American novel. But there were other comments, including some of mine, recognizing the merits of the 3rd candidate and that it was not an easy decision to move from 3 to 2 candidates. And I'm wondering if some type of statement to that effect, how the board would feel about adding that, because I think it should be on record that we did have 3 very strong candidates.
Sure.
I'm just trying to think, John. It's what we want the minutes to reflect are the issues before the committee and the actions taken. If you had some language suggested, maybe we could. If I could, maybe I'd just insert that Mr. Carpenter spoke favorably on the candidacy of Assistant Superintendent Richards.
That'll be sufficient.
Would you like to, is there any problem with that addition? Okay, all those in favor of the minutes as amended, please signify by raising your right hand. All those opposed? 6-0.
Move to approve the minutes dated June 9th, 2003.
Second.
Second. Discussion? No comments. All those in favor, please, of the minutes of June 9th, signify by raising your right hand. 6-0.
Finally, move to approve the minutes dated June 17th, 2003.
Sorry, Rob. A little short-sighted there.
You won't let go. You won't let go.
I didn't even find any shorts. Oh, I didn't even find any typos in these.
Yes,
Very good.
We just did that, didn't we?
Second, it was second. All those, comment, discussion. None being seen, all those in favor of the minutes, please signify by raising your right hand. 6-0. And that brings to an end the business for this evening. Go ahead.
We have some executive session minutes that we need to bring up to date. They're about 2-3 months old. Is there any way we should move those forward somehow?
Yes, I will, what has generally been the practice would be that the vice chairs in the past, the vice chair and the chair, typically the vice chair would go work with the superintendent to be sure what's released, what's released. So as such, I would ask Vice Chair, Mr. McFadden, to see if he can work with Mr. Schettini and look at the minutes.
He seemed to have a facial expression of eagerness.
He did, I saw that, Mr. Russo.
On the edge, some information, the Suburban Coalition, some information, time for us to join $200 join. Just let us know, and then we would.
What's it for?
Suburban Coalition.
It's a coalition of suburban schools around the 128 belt. For the most part, they provide information as well as having meetings and forums for the community members to attend. Many districts in the area are members. We're more than happy to sign up. Relatively low cost with the input, information, and opportunity to network that you get.
This is, and we've worked, Harry worked with them in the past, I believe. Are they becoming a more formalized group?
Yes, I mean, they've been in the area for a long while. They have a good base of information. They're a good resource of information should a lot of policy issues come up. I would suggest that if you'd like, we're more than happy to sign you up, and more than happy to, when we get the information, share it with you.
What does anybody in the committee think here? Do we have any comments?
That's fine.
Okay. Without any being seen, I think it's important to have these kind of advocacy groups working in our favor. So I would encourage the superintendent to sign us up with the Suburban Coalition.
The other information that we're sending around, we just received, is information on the joint meeting of the Association of School Superintendents and the Association of School Committees. It's on November 12 to 14 at the Worcester Centrum. It's a time to get a lot of information. I'm not sure if this committee in the past has attended these. Committee members that I've spoken with that have attended have come back with a lot of information. So if you're interested in that, we're more than happy to sign you up. Regarding cost and the like, we'll get more information should you be interested in attending.
Okay. Good. Great. Thank you.
If we look for a motion to adjourn.
Entertain that at this time?
Great, motion to adjourn.
What about our,
One thing,
where our next meeting is?
Pardon me?
Our next meeting is still at, okay.
Saturday?
Yeah, here.
Yeah.
Okay.
We haven't talked exactly about the location, but it's here unless we provide you information otherwise.
Okay.
A week from Saturday.
August the 16th.
16th.
9 a.m.
9 a.m. Yeah. In our calendar, it's stated 8 a.m.
Is it 8?
Yes.
It said 8, but we had talked about 9. I think 9 is a...
In the posting, we'll put 9 o'clock.
Do people want to go earlier or later?
Would you like to go earlier?
Earlier.
Earlier. I'm flexible either way.
Anybody feel either way? 8:30 is fine. Let's do it at 8:30.
And the rookie member
Model
brings
of
breakfast?
compromise.
Okay, motion's been made to adjourn. Did somebody make that?
I made that.
Second?
second.
Okay, all those in favor, raise your right hand. Fine. We stand adjourned. All right.
Welcome, Elaine. First meeting done.